What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And on March 31st, 2025, we have gotten a banned and restricted announcement that, albeit for the modern format, was pretty underwhelming, but did make all the necessary changes to the format by banning exactly Underworld Breach from the format. Now, it was definitely a hotly contested topic if Mox Opal should be the card that's banned, if we should keep Underworld Breach around. I just think Underworld Breach is the card that is the most broken of all of them. Of course, now we've seen some Mox Opal decks kind of pop up and get very popular. We've even seen like Blue-White Affinity end up kind of taking center stage. I believe it even made the finals of the Apex Gaming Invitational 5K Modern Tournament that took place just this past weekend. So it's definitely a deck that seems like it has some legs. Kappa Cannoneer is a heck of a Magic card, especially when we kind of talked about it during the spoiler season for MH3. But in this video, normally we end up talking about some of the winners and losers, and I think just in general that it's a big win for the format. I mean, Underworld Breach and just that style of deck required you to have a ton of different sideboard cards that all did seemingly different things. I mean, we'd seen people playing like Collector Oof and Stony Silence to show off the activated abilities of artifacts. Then you just had things like Force of Vigor and all these other like Shatter type effects, and then you had the Graveyard Hate with like Soul Guide Lantern, Tormod's Crypt, Leyline of the Void, all these things going on. You had to attack on so many different angles, and sure, some of those cards could go and fit into other matchups, but you were generally bringing in like 10 to 12 cards, like not even joking, like probably 8 to 12 cards for that matchup specifically, especially if you were like also packing main deck hate, then you were bringing in less, but then that meant that you were just also playing main deck hate specifically for the breach decks, and proved to be too powerful for the format. So instead of doing a winners and losers, I'm just going to give you 3 decks that I would play in the early parts of this modern format. I think they're decks that you're going to get a lot of mileage on, either you've already been playing or just new decks that I think are just in general very powerful strategies for the modern format outside of a metagame where Breach is the very best thing to be doing. But of course, before we get into any of the decks and talk about the modern format, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where we talk mainly about the modern standard formats, as those are the main competitive formats of 60-card Magic the Gathering. So please be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell if you want to see videos on that. We do go over decks, we cover some of the major events, we try to give you some insight on, you know, what the players are going to be thinking of going into the event, and of course give it daily recaps of those events kind of as they happen. And we also do some other longer form fun content just to kind of get your brains thinking, of course, get some discussion going on in the community, whether I'm right or wrong. You know, I always have personally a lot of fun doing those kinds of videos. It's a nice way to kind of break up a lot of the competitive stuff that goes on here. And if you'd like to support me even further, you can go to the description down below. I have a link to my Discord server. You can go over there and join, as well as following me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/Cardade23, where we've been streaming a lot of Modern here lately. And I think we're going to be playing a little bit of Modern, and we're going to be helping Randy playtest for the regional championship coming up by playing a bunch of aggro decks, because I think Monstrous Rage is going to be like one of the best things to be doing in the format and continue to be one of the best things in the format, assuming that no emergency changes end up happening. So lastly, I want to thank the sponsor channel, Manatraders. Manatraders is a monthly subscription service that you can use to rent cards on Magic the Gathering Online and play in various different leagues and challenges and whatever the case may be. We use it for playtesting a lot here on the Casual Spikes YouTube channel, which you can also find linked in the description down below. And it's honestly, it's really cool just being able to play whatever deck that I want to play at the time. We have been playing a lot of Yawgmoth on stream. We also even got to play Hollowed One, and Manatraders made that very easy and very simple to do that. So I want to thank them for being a sponsor of the channel, and go ahead and use my code in the description down below for 5% off your monthly subscription. I want to thank Manatraders for sponsoring the video, or for sponsoring the channel rather, and then let's go ahead and get into my 3 decks that you should be playing in the modern format. Just as a note, just because I don't specifically call out your deck among these 3 decks doesn't mean that I don't think the deck is necessarily viable in the modern format. I think modern does kind of reward players a lot for mastery of their specific archetype and just having a deeper understanding of their deck, what the opponents are trying to do with their deck, and of course just in general modern knowledge. So really, these are just 3 decks that I think you get a lot out of for kind of doing that and just playing tons of games with and really getting into the reps and really learning the modern format. That if you were just going to kind of start playing the format, these are the decks that I would start with, because I think they give you probably the most like bang for your buck. Like, they're just really good decks that also pay you off for being very knowledgeable about them and the format as a whole. So with that said, let's go ahead and check out our first deck. So the first deck we're going to look at is Orzhov Midrange. Now, I know it's probably pretty easy to come to this conclusion. Orzhov midrange, this was arguably one of the, the second or third best deck in the format against Breach. So why wouldn't it just slot into number one? It makes sense. You kick off the top deck, you just move second to first place. I don't think it's always necessarily that cut and dry when it comes to figuring out, like, okay, what's going to be the best deck in the format, what's the second best, so on and so forth. But I think Orzhov midrange does have a lot of powerful tools that are going to allow it to kind of transition from being a deck that was good against, the in general metagame, and then, good to great against the best deck in the format, to just being an overall, like, a very solid mid-range deck to play in the format. And it really all comes back to this card, Ketramos, where, 3 mana, 4/4, Menace, Lifelink, Indestructible, can't attack or block unless there are 7 more cards in exile, and whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from graveyards enter the battlefield during your turn, you draw a card and you lose a life. The fact that that is not not a once per turn on your own turn sort of trigger, but you can, if you can manage to exile, 1 card multiple times, then you are able to get multiple draws, of course, at the cost of a few life points, which we all know that in Magic, 1 life for 1 card is, definitely worth the trade, and players that play the One Ring know that they're willing to pay a heck of a lot more life and bigger chunks for more cards. There's maybe have to pay the cost later. But this Ketramos card, we saw it make a huge impact in this Orzhov midrange deck. It was already a deck that players were playing and decided to play even before Ketramos, and after it came out and players were able to play it, they just jammed 4 copies in their deck and they've never looked back. This thing is an absolute card advantage machine. And on top of that too, once you actually get it online, especially since you don't have to go 1 card by 1 card. You think, I got to draw 7, lose 7 to get this thing to attack. But, with cards like Relic of Progenitus that we see in this deck that are going to exile themselves, you remove Relic of Progenitus from the game when you activate its second ability, meaning that you get to draw a card from that. You get to draw a card from the, the resolution of the ability. And since it removes all graveyards from the game, you then also get to draw another card. So Relic of Progenitus, weirdly, is like a 2 mana draw 3, which is absolutely insane. And of course, just a repeatable draw engine on top of that, when you get to factor in the fact that you get to tap target player, remove a card from his or graveyard from the game. So Relic, in conjunction with like a format that has historically had most of the decks that find success want to use their graveyard, Relic of Progenitus is just going to be a card that, they get a little bit more out of, thanks to Ketramos, for the fact that even if you are playing against a deck that doesn't necessarily care about their graveyard, you're still just exiling a card from their graveyard and you're going to get to draw a card and lose a life. Kind of Underworld Connections-y-esque if you talk to any of the mid-2010 Magic the Gathering players that played Standard at the time. But there's also some other powerful synergies going on here. Thalia has proven to be a very powerful card. I'd seen this kind of in some of the Boros Energy decks, which was honestly a lot of fun to play as like a one-of in those decks. But we see 4 copies here of this 2 mana 2/2 legendary creature. Has flash, so you can just leave up mana on turn 2. Also allows you to kind of disguise it for something like Orcish Bowmaster, which at this point players are probably expecting Thalia over Orcish Bowmaster. But either way, there's some situations where you can kind of get players with a turn 2 Orcish Bowmaster. But Thalia also just being able to attack, exile a non-land permanent, and any non-land permanent for that matter. So you could even exile your opponent's things to kind of get in for extra damage, and then you return that permanent at the beginning of the next end step, and then if it was something that came under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on Thalia, meaning that as you're attacking and you're blinking, say, Overlord of the Baelmerk and getting those additional counters, while also getting it off impending and having to just enter the battlefield as a 5/5 creature that you're going to be able to attack with and continue to get card advantage in that way. Thalia is going to do a very good job of definitely being kind of that value engine. Of course, we also have things like Solitude. You have Witch Enchanter as well, that you can end up just blowing up repeated artifacts and enchantments and opponent controls every single time. Witch Enchanter and Bogart Trawler are also having some additional synergy, I'd say, with Flicker Wisp, because you could just play Bogart Trawler or Witch Enchanter as a land. Play out your game, then you play a Flicker Wisp, you then end up flickering one of those lands. They end up coming back on the front side, so then you end up getting to blow up an artifact or enchantment, or you're getting to exile your opponent's graveyard. There's a really weird kind of quirk, I would say, in the game, obviously with like double face cards that whenever you blink them, they end up going on their front face. So if you ended up playing like the spell version of these, it would just end up going to the graveyard, because obviously you can't have a spell on the battlefield. But with these creatures, you end up getting even more, because Overlord can go find you lands, and then when you don't need the lands anymore, Flicker Wisp can turn these back into creatures and give you some value that way. Of course, Ephemerate, Fatal Push as well being very good. Well, Fatal Push and Thoughtseize being very good interaction format. Marshal the Otherworldly Light as well, when you're drawing all these these cards ends up, allowing you to then exile bigger things for a little bit lower of a cost, meaning that you can kind of ditch some of those extra cards before you have to discard to hand size because you're going to end up losing them anyway, while also just being able to be efficient on your mana as well, where you're able to play like March plus Thoughtseize plus a 2-mana creature on like turn 4 or whatever. There's just a lot of possibilities there with this deck, because it is going to be very easy to hit your land drops once you get a Ketramos, and especially a Relic of Progenitus kind of going all at the same time here, and also a pretty straightforward mana base as well. On top of, again, white and black just having very good sideboard cards, and of course, players playing Mill, so we have to play the Emrakul, the Aeon's Torrent. I just want someone to play something other than Emrakul, one of the other Shuffle Eldrazi's. But, overall, I think that there's a lot of mileage you can get out of the black-white deck. I think that just in general, its game plan of just kind of grinding you out with card advantage is going to go over very well in this format, especially with some of the disruptive tools that it has. And, I think this is a case where this is arguably one of the top 3 to 5 decks of the modern format in Breach was legal, and I think this kind of slots in and ends up being, another really high tier deck. Now, is it going to be the best deck in the format? I'm not entirely sure. Players are still trying to figure things out, but for me personally, this would be one of the places I would start if I really wanted to play a mid-range strategy in the format. And I kind of just play whatever I want. I would just sleeve up 4 Ketramos, 4 Overlord of the Baelmerk, 4 Phalia, and then just let the rest of the deck speak for itself. But, that is the black-white mid-range deck. Let's go ahead and take a look at deck number 2. Next, we have Amulet Titan. There's this running joke in the Magic community that Amulet Titan has always been a tier 1 deck through any format, whether it was Splinter Twin, Birthing Pod, if it was Eldrazi Winter, Hogak Summer, of course, Nadu Summer as well, as of course, Breach Winter / Spring Summer stuff. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Amulet Titan is always a deck that the high tier players and like the really, really ingrained in franchise players really benefit from playing. It's a deck that has a very powerful strategy that is oddly resilient. And, if you just play Titan, your chances of like top decking exactly the card that you need, aka Primeval Titan, go up like 20 or 30% versus like the negative like 5% it feels like whenever you're playing any other deck in the format. So, on top of that, too, Amulet Titan does have a few tricks other than just putting a Primeval Titan into play. We've seen quite a bit, and we've seen it happen on stream too. This card, Aftermath Analyst, being absolutely sick in conjunction with the card Shifting Woodland, because you can have Shifting Woodland as long as you have Delirium. Copy an Aftermath Analyst. You can then pay mana to sacrifice Aftermath Analyst, aka the Shifting Woodland, to return all lands from your graveyard, meaning the Shifting Woodlands comes back, and all these other lands that you have coming into play to potentially just make enough mana and kind of go infinite in a way to where you can then Shifting Woodland, copy Aftermath Analyst, and just kind of do this all and over again. Thanks to Lotus Field and of course other cards that end up copying these lands that allow you to sacrifice them, put them into the graveyard. But this is a strategy that, again, for a very long time, players have been paid off in playing. I mean, we see even like Scape Shift is like a way that you can kind of combo Summoner's Pact here. Actually, just had 2 copies in this deck to go and find any one of these creatures. You have Arboreal Grazer. It's going to be a very good ramp. Of course, these utility lands here, like Echoing Deeps, just copy lands in the graveyard. So it allows for these like tricky plays where you go and get like Lotus Field and like Mirror Pool or whatever, and then you're able to, play, Lotus Field for mana, Mirror Pool for mana, copy a Titan, sacrifice these, then go get Echoing Deeps and like another Lotus Field, and then you're able to do the same thing over again, make another copy of Titan, go and get whatever other bullshit that this deck can go get, and just kind of set you up for long-term success. So, I mean, it's a deck that is very resilient. It's a deck that can win the game on like turn 2, turn 3. I'm not going to say like overly consistently, but it does have plenty of lines where it can win the game on turn 3 through a decent amount of disruption. So, but in the grand scheme of things, it is a deck where you have to learn a lot of these like main lines as well as these kind of side lines that you have to take when your opponent presents certain hate pieces or they're playing certain decks or whatever. It is a deck that goes pretty freaking deep. I mean, it's super complicated. I mean, I remember even like watching a lot of this deck being played and goldfishing a lot with it, and then taking it to a tournament and still just kind of feeling overwhelmed. Just like, am I getting the right lands? Am I doing, it just comes with, having to get the experience of playing the deck. And I think Amulet Titan, going forward, it's a deck that just doesn't seem like it's ever going to be on Wizards' radar. So I think it's a deck that's worth kind of investing your time in and learning how to play and really understanding the lines of play. and what you need to do to find success with the deck, because I mean, let's get real here. Like, winning the game on turn 2 or turn 3, even in the post-board games, and your opponent's never really seemingly having the right amount of, or like the right disruption, and they're not, I think, really being a right answer to disrupt the Amulet Titan deck. It's probably worth getting into and playing it, even if it is the bane of my existence. And I will forever hate playing it on stream, because it feels like I just get turn 2 or turn 3 both games every single time. It's really sad, but we did end up getting our revenge against an Amulet Titan player, so I don't feel bad for them one bit, even if you do need a degree to pilot this deck. But, you know, that is the Amulet Titan deck. Now let's go ahead and look at our final deck on our list. Lastly, we have Boros Energy. Now, this is a deck that I constantly disrespected. I only really started giving respect to it once the One Ring got banned, and it was still one of the best decks to be playing in the format. And then, you know, it just completely exploded, and of course it definitely fell off during the regional championship season. We also just had like an anomaly of like an absolutely insane tier 1 deck in the format, and it really probably bordering on like tier 0.5 or tier 0, honestly, with, you know, some of the lines that some of these players took playing Breach was absolutely insane. But Boros Energy still managed to find success, even as it saw its metagame share dwindle. I think that, and it went without saying, I think that this is one of the more consistent, if not one of the most consistent decks in the format, where, you know, your explosive draws are very explosive, and even some of your mediocre draws are pretty good, and, you know, comparatively to the rest of the format. You know, we've talked about Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls being a very potent 1-2 punch, where you lean on Guide of Souls, play an Ocelot Pride, you end up just getting to generate advantage, even if you're not able to attack into what your opponent has going on. Just as long as you have creatures, you're going to be able to make cats, and then eventually get to the City's Blessing and make even more tokens. On top of the other token synergies that we have in the deck, of course, Ragavan making treasure tokens. If you don't crack that treasure, you end up making a copy of a treasure. Ajani makes a 2-1 cat, you're going to make another 2-1 cat. You have Seasoned Pyromancer, you ditch non-land cards, you make 1/1s, you're going to make more 1/1s, which means you're going to get more energy, allowing Guide of Souls and multiples to put more counters on your creatures and allow you to give them flying, jump over your opponent's creatures, and hit them for a bunch of damage while finishing them off with a Goblin Bombardment. This is a deck that can apply equal pressure through not attacking and through attacking. The main 1-drops of the deck, you don't care if you draw multiples of one over the other, because with multiple Ocelot Prides and 1 Guide of Souls, you're still getting Ocelot Pride triggers, and you're going to be able to even double those tokens and then double up on the double tokens. Where Guide of Souls, even if you just have 1 Ocelot Pride, but you have multiple Guide of Souls, you're going to end up generating enough energy at a certain point where you're just going to be able to attack with a bunch of these 1/1s, and then just every single turn activate Guide of Souls, putting, you know, an additional 6 power into play, giving them flying, and being able to beat over your opponent's creatures, and then basically nullify any targeted removal, because you already got your value from the Guide of Souls, adding damage to the board, so they can't kill the Guide of Souls, so they have to kill the countered creatures, but you're just going to get more countered creatures. It's just a big mess. It's really, once the Boros Energy deck kind of snowballs and gets rolling, it's very hard to kind of contain it. You have to get to it early. And while a lot of decks, you know, can kind of offer some of that disruption very early to kind of stop what the Boros Energy deck has going on, there's just times where you're just going to have to hope that, like, oh, I hope that I curve 1-2-3 and it's better than their 1-2-3, and then they just have like double Ocelot Pride, double Guide of Souls into something like Seasoned Pyromancer, and then it's like, oh, here's the City's Blessing, and then I have 2 Ocelot Pride, so I'm going to make 4 and then 8 Elementals, and then I'm also going to have like 8 cats in play, and just something just insane and absurd, and they followed up with Goblin Bombardment. It's like, oh, cool, they don't even have to attack. Like, even if I can kind of keep the board in check, Goblin Bombardment's still going to come down, and it's going to absolutely blow me away, you know, after they get to attack and just sack all the creatures that I block. You know, this deck is just super hard to stop once it gets going. It's been a very, very good deck in the metagame, really, since its release in Modern Horizon 3. It was like the second best deck during the Nadu format. It was the best deck after that format. It was one of the best decks going into the regional championship season after, you know, the One Ring and Amp Raptor got banned. And it's a deck that you could argue probably could still use some bannings to kind of tone it back. So for me, at least until it like firmly gets pushed down the card of the metagame, I think that this is going to be one of the best decks to play and consistently be one of the best decks. And on top of that, too, if you played this deck before the regional championship cycle, and maybe you switch to something like Teamer Breach or Orzhov Midrange, I think this is a deck that you can kind of safely come back to and expect to get some results from it, especially if you have put in that time and effort with it, because you're going to understand a lot more of the lines of play, and then you're going to be able to focus on learning essentially the new metagame rather than trying to figure out the deck while also learning the metagame. So I think that gives Boros Energy a lot of leeway. And of course, like we said, for black-white, I really like the white sideboard cards for this deck. And of course, Blood Moon, Molten Rains, things like that are not bad additions to the deck either. But, that's my list of 3 decks that you should be playing in the Modern format. Again, this does not mean that you need to only play these 3 decks, or this is what the format is going to look like. These are just the decks personally that I really like. I think that they all offer a very powerful, plan A strategy, with plan B also being very effective. Or in the case of like Amulet Titan, its plan is just so effective that you can enable it very quickly through disruption and really just kind of make it hard for your opponent to be able to interact in the ways that they actually need to, just as a deck that, has so many different lines of play that your opponent has to also consider those lines of play while you're kind of doing your thing. Boros Energy is definitely more kind of in your face, like this is what I'm doing, and there's just times where your opponent just doesn't have enough removal or doesn't have enough interaction to stop what you're doing, and you just snowball out of control and make it very, very, very hard for them to even get to some semblance of parity in the game. And of course, Orzhov Midrange, honestly, probably my early pick to be one of the best decks in the format, especially it being a mid-range deck. I look forward to playing the absolute crap out of it. But let me know what you think in the comments down below of what decks you're going to be playing in this Modern RCQ season. I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel if you want more Modern and Standard videos. We're going to be streaming a little bit this week of Standard and Modern, so definitely want to go check that out. Go ahead and follow me over on Twitch. Of course, join the Discord server. Follow the Casual Spikes podcast for more Modern and Standard content. And of course, go check out the link in the description down below for Manatraders. Use my code, get 5% off your monthly subscription, and, have at it. Go ahead and rent one of these decks. I'm going to have the deck list in the description down below. And yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.